Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Blame It on the Stars, where we give you an inside look on what's going on in the universe so you can blame your problems on the stars. It is Jade here.
And it's Kara.
And this week is a very special, intense episode. We'll be talking all about the lunar eclipse in Taurus that happens on Tuesday. If you're listening to this on Monday, make sure you listen to this throughout. And if you're listening to this later in the week, don't worry, it's fine, because the impact of this will last for quite a minute. Speaking of things that have a long-lasting impact, in case you missed it, last week we talked all about Mars retrograde, which is a retrograde that happens all the way until next year. So if you want to know what the next few months have in store for you and you missed that episode, definitely check it out whenever you can. That information will still be relevant up until next year.
And just to give you a heads up, next week we will tell you everything that you need to know about Venus and Mercury in Sagittarius.
And after a short ad break, let's discuss all things lunar eclipse. All right, welcome back. Let's talk about this eclipse. So the lunar eclipse in Taurus happens on November 8th at 6:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Per usual, the date and time are from the website astroseek.com. What on earth do you need to know about this lunar eclipse? We mentioned this a little bit in the Scorpio season episode, but just to refresh, change is happening. It's inevitable. And this eclipse is challenging how comfortable you are with change. You will be facing it somehow or another. This eclipse is all about reevaluating different areas in your life, what needs to change, what will change on its own, how comfortable, again, you are with change. Things from the past may need to be let go for new things to come in.
Lunar eclipses are special full moons, so we're going to be releasing a lot, and because this is happening in the sign of Taurus, it's going to be focused on releasing and letting go of things that have been a certain way for a while, which is difficult. We've had Uranus in Taurus for a while, already switching things up and asking us to change and rebuild and all of that. But again, this lunar eclipse is going to bring our attention there on a more personal level.
Yeah, and pretty much everybody feels this eclipse. So as Kara mentioned, eclipses are basically new or full moons. This is a full moon that has conjunctions to the north and south node. And that says a lot about where we're going in society. The north node is currently in Taurus and the south node is currently in Scorpio. So this is an eclipse that everybody feels, and the effects of the eclipse tend to be felt for around 6 months. So even though if you're listening to this episode later in the week, these are likely themes that you've been thinking about for quite a while. The realizations you have on Tuesday aren't new. They're ones that have been culminating for quite some time and will still be a main focal point for you up until next year when the North Node leaves Taurus. That's a story for another day. But I just wanted to mention that, as Kara said, these are themes you've been thinking about for just quite some time.
So one of the reasons why eclipses are so important and so intense, as Jade mentioned, is because of the aspects that it makes to the North and South Node. The North Node's in Taurus, and it's been there for a while, but it's there for about a year and a half. We've already been having eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio, so we're kind of like in the middle, nearing the end of this whole cycle. But if you didn't know, the North Node is all about our direction in life and where we're headed, and it's just important to know or maybe think about, especially if you are experiencing this in a very intense way and you're struggling to deal with all of the changes and things that are going on in your life, that a lot of this is supposed to help us continue working towards whatever we're meant to, things that are just very important and meaningful in our lives.
Yeah, and it's also important to think about the fact that the sun is conjunct the south node during this. And if the sun represents like kind of our identity, and the south node is what we need to leave behind in this regard, you might be thinking what old versions of you, of the self, need to go so you can achieve this, what you were meant to, as Kara had said. It's going to feel uncomfortable, and why it'll feel uncomfortable we'll talk about in just a second, because why this whole eclipse matters, besides the fact that it's an eclipse, is the aspects that it makes are very notable, alter the whole definition of this eclipse, and show up very uncomfortably. But again, change, that's the key thing, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But I know a lot of people like to ask, okay, so like you said, the effects of this eclipse can be felt for 6 months, but how long does this actual eclipse last? And you may be shocked to know, but it only happens for a moment. The moon changes signs very quickly. So if you ever notice, hey, the moon is in Taurus today, but tomorrow it's in Gemini, that's because the moon moves very quickly. So this eclipse is only happening for a moment, but the effects can be felt for a little bit longer.
Another thing that's important to know about this eclipse is that it's happening at 16 degrees Taurus. So if you're familiar with your chart, then you're going to want to figure out where 16 degrees Taurus, or even just what house is ruled by Taurus in your chart, to figure out how it affects you personally.
Yeah, and certain signs will be affected more than others. Taurus and Scorpio will feel this one head on because the eclipse is happening with the sun in Scorpio, the moon in Taurus. So both Taurus and Scorpio placements will, depending on what the planet is in question, be feeling this the most intensely, probably feel this desire to change the most. And again, depending on what planet is, if it's like a Mercury in Scorpio, maybe you're realizing your communication style needs to change. Or if you are a Taurus Venus, maybe relationships are being brought up during this time. It'll depend on the planets, but Taurus and Scorpio definitely will feel this one strongest.
Yeah, and then if you have Leo or Aquarius placements, then this eclipse will be square whatever planets you have in those signs. Squares are a bit more challenging. They bring about tension just because it can be very uncomfortable. Even though the signs that are square have things in common, they still like to do things in their own way. So it might feel like whatever you are releasing, letting go of, whatever things are changing in your life might feel a little bit more difficult or challenging at first.
Now, let's get into the aspects, because that's really where the juice of this eclipse comes. So during the day of the eclipse, the sun will be conjunct Mercury and Venus, and the moon will be opposite both Mercury and Venus, meaning that while we're thinking about needing to change things in our lives, out with the old, in with the new, reevaluating patterns that have been in our lives, or habits, or anything that's been in our lives for a long period of time, relationships and communication will be brought into the picture. How are you thinking? Has the way you've been thinking about things been helping you? How do you speak to yourself? How do you speak to others? Is this something that is beneficial? Is this something that needs to change? Do you talk more than listen? Do you practice active listening? Are you empathetic? Are your communication styles more on the surface? Are they deeper? That's one of the things that's being questioned here. And then the same thing goes with relationships, all types of relationships. Are these relationships in your life helping you? Do they feel like the right relationships for you? Also, too, since Venus deals with finances, money might be something that's brought up during this time. What is your relationship with money? Do you have positive spending habits, or do you save? What is your relationship with money like? You'll be thinking about that during this time.
Another aspect to be aware of during this lunar eclipse is that the sun and moon are square Saturn. And as we know, Saturn is another challenging, restrictive planet, but it also is very practical and realistic. So whatever changes are happening might feel like a roadblock or maybe like a little bit of a detour, like you're not able to do the thing that you want to do. Another thing though is that sometimes this can be changes happening in things that have been one way for a while, or sometimes even things that have been not working so well for a while and you haven't yet had the chance to focus on it or to really find a way to like reevaluate and reflect and like revise and fix whatever that topic area of your life is.
And now you might be wondering, okay, Jade, you've talked a lot about change, but I know Taurus is a fixed sign. It does not like change. I know Scorpio is also a fixed sign. Fixed doesn't like to change. So why is this eclipse all about change? And that is because the moon is conjunct Uranus during this eclipse, and the sun is opposite Uranus during this eclipse. And with Uranus being involved in an eclipse, which is already very malefic in nature, Uranus, the planet of the unexpected, rebellion, and of course, change, is literally at the focal point of this eclipse, meaning that Uranus is here to say things in your life have been the same for a long time and some of it is not serving you anymore. We need to change things up here. Things in your life need to change. That is why change is the most important thing that comes out of this eclipse. And since Uranus is an outer planet, this does have societal implications. I'm sure you'll probably notice this in society. Things will change. And also, too, the eclipse is something that is felt by everyone. This is not something that can be ignored. And why we say to change is happening and your comfortability with change is being questioned here is because both Taurus and Scorpio tend to want things to stay the same. They're both fixed signs. And then we have a square to Saturn in Aquarius, which is also fixed in nature. Saturn is things that last for a long period of time under conflict with Uranus. It's basically saying, are you going to accept the fact that things are changing? How comfortable are you willing to get with the uncomfortable? Because everything that needs to happen is going to be uncomfortable because change itself is uncomfortable. A lot to talk about with that one. I'm sure you notice it. I'm sure you'll notice it in the world around you, but that's why change matters, is because Uranus, it's not going to let you get out of this eclipse without something changing. Because that's what it does. It's a wild card energy.
The last aspect that we wanted to mention was that the sun is trine Neptune, and this is a little glimmer of hope. So Neptune is the planet that deals with dreams. It can hopefully give us some optimism and positive energy as we're kind of going through all of these changes. You also might find that connecting to your more spiritual side or creative side during this time can be really helpful. Again, change can be stressful, so finding a creative outlet for what you're going through could be a good thing.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the eclipse in a nutshell. It's a lot to deal with. And if you are curious to know how this is impacting you and your chart specifically, right? Because a lot of things are changing at this time. I'm sure you're going through a lot of changes in your own life or realizations. We can help you navigate that through readings. Readings are hosted on an app called Intro, which allows for FaceTime style like calls. You just choose who you want the reading with, either me, Jade, or Kara. We have time slots for as short as 15 minutes to as long as an hour. You decide what you want the reading to be about. You can write whatever questions you might have regarding astrology, and we'll be able to answer them for you live on the call.
And if you've never booked a reading with us before, you can use the code STARS, all caps, STARS, for $20 off your first reading.
And then, as Kara mentioned, next week, we'll be talking all about both Venus and Mercury entering Sagittarius. I'm sure That sounds like a lot more lighter and fun energy compared to some of the other things we've been talking about. So if you're looking to hear about what fun might be in store, then make sure that you listen to next week's episode. Be on the lookout for that. But also just make sure you're following us on social media as we continue to post updates on what's going on in the astrology. We are on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at BLME The Stars. That is all for now, and we'll see you all next Monday. Bye.